So hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first Master of Architecture talk. My name is Jennifer Jiayi. I'm the lead of Performing Architecture Studio at Northumbria. Connor, could you mute yourself? So yeah. So for visitors who are not going to speak, could you mute yourself at the moment? Yeah, and Performing Architecture Studio is a master studio combining 50 and 60 students. I think I have all my students here, and there are many students joining this session from different master and GA studio, and probably more friends from all different parts of the world. So very welcome. We do have a short Q&A session afterwards. So if you hold any question, please feel free to raise it by person or type it from the dialog bar, and I will read it afterwards. And today I have a guest speaker, and I have great honor to introduce you to Yusin Wu. I know Yusin for a long, long time, and this dates back to my PhD years at Nottingham. And I know him because I found his personal architecture blog, and he was blogging his day-to-day life and his learning experience and his project from the University of Sheffield. And I was truly amazed by the design sensibility, the drawing skills, the observation and the reflection from each and every project he had produced in back to his bachelor degree years. After 3 years at Sheffield, Yusin moved to London and was trained at the office of Florian, Beigel, and Philip Christou from 2018 to 2016 to 2017, and has been working for Caruso St John Architects in London since 2017. He's currently a final year Master of Architecture student at London Metropolitan University under the tutelage of Professor Peter St John, who is also probably joining us today. Yusin has been the guest critic at Nottingham University in Ningbo, China, since 2018, and he's a regular contributor to architecture column in Wallpaper Magazine Chinese edition from 2019. Yusin's previous projects were nominated for RIBA President Medal in 2017 and Architecture Journal Student Prize in 2020. And he may cover some of these projects during the talk today. So I will stop here and pass to you, Yusin.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Just going to share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
So I don't think it's like a talk. I am more considering as a dialogue, and I'm not just presenting the project I done in the past few years, but mostly they are the same, and the ideas I think related to the idea of the theater in the city. And the title of the talk is called Promenade Stages and the City. So promenade is a word to describe a walk in the city or take a walk in the city. But also promenade is a specific type of theater. So promenade theater is not the audience have a seat in an enclosed environment. Promenade theater asks audience to go around the city or different places with the actors. So as you see in this, the first page of the presentation is engraving of a medieval mystery play. And the play is actually happening in the city of York in the UK. That time, this religion kind of drama and theater, which taken the form of the wagon, and all the actors standing on this movable theater stage, going all around the city. And where the story happens and what the story about is directly linked to the context of the city or the backdrop of the city scene. And how the story goes almost is accidental, because it has a direct interaction with the citizens in the city. And that's the idea of the promenade theater. Is a theater by chance, by accidents, and also a stage in the city. The first part of the talk, I want to present a few competition projects and also unbuilt projects I did with the collaboration of some of my dear friends. And many of them, they are public art installation, pavilions, or landscape design, for example, a park or a garden. And many of them don't have a specific site condition. So they can be everywhere and any places around the world. And it's more about the internal space to become a theatrical interior. And I call them like everyday theater. When thinking of a theater, I won't thinking about a grand opera house or actual theater space. The first image come to my mind is a theater of smells. This is a photo I taken almost 4 years ago when I was an undergraduate student. It was first time to visit Venice. And the image shows the Rialto fish market just next to the Rialto bridge. And every morning, all the fishmongers, they're kind of dealing with the fish and they sell the fish to all the residents or the visitors in Venice. And I remember the first time I went into the market, it was a very hot summer. And you can smell this kind of very unpleasant smell of the fish, but also that unpleasant smell directly connect to the smell of the lagoon and the smell of the sea. In the book by Palasma, actually is one of my favorite books, The Eyes of the Skin, describe actually the vision separates us from the world, where the other senses united us together. So for me, this is a theater. It's a perfect example of theater, but it's not a theater of an actual play, but it's a theater of smells. And the smells directly connected to the representation of the color. So every time when I saw a Venetian red curtains, I'm not thinking of a grand palace or opera house. I'm thinking of the smell of the fish and the sea. So this is a little pavilion I designed when I was in school. It's a project for the city of Scarborough. The site is located on a hill, on an abandoned churchyard, and which is kind of higher points in the city and overlook to the sea. This dark timber roof, almost like the dark roof in the Rialto fish market. And the light timber structure holding this dark roof, almost like the roof is not there or the roof is floating. And the red curtain brings up that memory and the connection of the smell of the sea. So even when you are not actually getting close to the sea, in a higher part of the city, the sensation of the colors brings back to the memory of the sea and the smell of the sea. The next example is also about the theater of senses, but here in this one, it's about sound. When I think of sound, I'm not thinking about a theater of very lovely music or different kind of performance. I'm thinking of a theater of silence. Here is an artwork by Joseph Beuys, art 1985. I think it's one of his last work, which is done 1 year before he passed away. So here, Joseph Beuys not presents an installation of sounds, but quite opposite. It's an installation about totally silence. Here, Beuys curated 2 rooms, and they are enclosed by the walls. The walls is not the hard partition wall, but they are built from industrial felt. As we all know, felt is a very good material for the insulation. So it keeps the interior very warm, but also is a very good material to absorb sound. So when the visitor go into this curated space, they have these double feelings. First, they feel like they're being very much protected because they can feel the warmth in the room and the temperature raised up when you stay longer. But also, it's a totally silent space. It's very difficult to describe, but you can feel that almost dead silence. And Boyce also plays a grand piano in the center of one room. According to him, the contrast of this silence kind of address and also embrace the presence of the piano. So the sense does kind of give us the kind of erase our kind of feeling, emotional feelings, sensations towards the things and objects around us. In a competition project to design a winter shelter in the frozen lake in Winnipeg, in Canada, we want to address the same sensation and feelings of this little pavilion. And we are not given an exactly location of where that pavilion is going to be. So what we design mostly is about curate that internal space. Here, the ceiling was made of this kind of warm colored recycled industrial felt. And all the techniques, they are very simple. They're just being stapled together and then hung from above. And absolutely visually, we designed something very pleasant and beautiful and very nice for your eyes. But you need to know the story behind. So it's not just an eye candy or an image representation of a beautiful thing. It's a pavilion about warmth and these different sensations of the sound and how to curate that very quiet space in a slightly noisy winter activity ground. This is an image of a theater in Ljubljana, which designed by Judith Pichnik. It's a really known project because Pichnik designed this grand theater just next door. And this is a courtyard on a leftover land. And if you wanted to enter this little courtyard of performance space, you need to actually enter someone else's territory and go into this shared courtyard. And here, Plechnik adding different elements. Here you can see those kind of round elements is actually lights for night hanging on the wall. The four sides of facade and the elevation in this courtyard, they are very different and they have different characters. But Plechnik applies this almost like a grid-like language to standardize and give this continuity around the four walls. And suddenly this leftover space become a theater. And you can also see on the ground, the pavement is actually using different colors, different type of stone, and all the material actually they are recycled from the earthquake happening the year before in Ljubljana. So there's also on the history side, the surface of the site is the pavement. They are the memory of the time and the city. And this image is a project it's also in Scarborough. It's a public bathhouse. And the interior of a central basin area in that architecture. And it's almost the same principle following from the Plechnik example. It's also four side different elevation. They have totally different characters. But then the lights, they're almost like stars in a dark night, and they give this continuity around the four walls and also enclose this very intimate space in the middle. This is a very special project, which is a competition we did for the Architecture Biennale in Seoul, Korea. And the brief is asked us to design a private shelter as a public art installation. So there's this conflicts between the most private and most public kind of appearance of that public installation can be. And this is a collaboration with one of my dear friends, artist Yuxin Wu. And when we have the brief, the first thing we do is we really carefully looking on the streets of the Seoul in Korea. Here's an example of Pojangmacha, which is a food stall, kind of food stalls moving around the city and populate the street at night in Korea. But since, I think since the last 2 decades, because the authority think those structures, they are kind of illegal and not good for the image of the city, so they move them away. But we do very like those type of structure, those temporary structures. We like how they gathering together, almost like an army or like a group of community. And also we like the material they use, the kind of the plastic, almost tent-like structure. They suggest certain kind of interaction between the private and the public. Sometimes they have a transparent screen or windows, can emphasize from the fabric. Sometimes they have the strips, but maybe one strip is color filmed and then the other one is transparent. So you can actually peek into those little tents and see what is happening inside. So that's the design we did submit for the competition, which is almost like Project Matcha is a semi-transparent tent. It's very simple. And also the strip emphasized as one with color and one with transparency emphasized. And to address the public and private contradiction in the program, we also look into some most private idea of how you occupy the space. Here is an example of the productions and how you walk and around your bed, like the most private in the room. And we can see on the left-hand side is the Tracy Emin's bat installation artwork. And another one is Hugh Hefner's bat. He was is his office in Chicago, and he was the chief editor for the Playboy magazine at the time. And he always walking around the bat. He has a round bat in the office. So on the left-hand side, the bottom is Hugh Hefner's office. So he's the chief editor for the Playboy magazine at the time. And he has this amazing office, like he always wants to walk around his bat. He has this circular bat, and they have this round circular table around him. So you can select the page and the images for the Playboy magazine. Although this, the arrangement of the office has certain kind of erotic quality, but it's amazing how, that's what can be done and production can be done in a very domestic feeling of space. And on the right-hand side is also very, a project we feel very intimate, which is Swiss artist Manon. And she showed this almost like dressing room-like tent structure. And this kind of orange pinkish fabric dripping from top. And in the top, there's a mirror in the top of that structure, which also reminds me Sun Zhen's room. You can always find a little circular mirror somewhere in the room, and you can particularly see yourself with the objects in the room. So that's what we proposed. It's just an empty shelter with this semi-transparent screens. And in the middle of the activities, there's another kind of warm and more kind of romantic like color of another fabric, and wrapped around a circular bed, which you can sit and you can chat with friends, you can occupy at night. And on the top of it, there's a lantern giving a bit civic quality to the street. Here's a slightly different project. It's a master plan for the station square in front of the main station in Belgrade in Serbia. This is done in collaboration with Hale Architects in China. So as you can see in the image, that's the main train station at the moment. And because the gentrification, the local authority want to move the station to a kind of a new district. So this building is being abandoned. And they want the architect to design a new square in front of it. And there's no brief written for this competition. So you can do whatever you want. So what we come up is we're doing almost nothing. We're only fill the land with grass and some trees and embrace it, because it's not functional as a station anymore. So it can be anything. But we want a nice environment, kind of almost like a greenery, a big park to embrace it. and the other public transport can just go into this park, into the grass. And when we think about it, this large empty space, the first image come to our mind is this big piazza in Siena, in Italy, which, as you can see, it has a very gentle slope, but slightly deep. You can actually laying on the surface of the ground, and you can look down, and almost like a theater, amphitheater. But in our case, it's a green theater filled with grass, much softer than the Siena's the hard surface. And also we think about to have some sculptures or some objects on the grass. And then we think about Richard Serra's sculpture Shift. And it's about a theater about in the movement. So even the sculpture, they are still on the ground, but the visitor us moving around the landscape, and we observe the sculpture, the objects differently from different angle on our everyday pathway from a square. So what we proposed is we carefully traced everything, whatever that is electricity box or old monuments, a different patch of surface because of different use through the years. We trace them and we replace them with a metal kind of mark on the ground. Sometimes they become just a very beautiful metal line leading you into the center of the park. Sometimes it become a large sculpture like water feature or a fountain. So the next project I want to present is actually a theater project. So the program is a theater. It's a theater for the city of York, which is famous for the mystery play, the medieval mystery play. And it's about a city full of different kind of stages. And so that's a map of the city of York. You may not see them very clearly, but there's this red line where it says the medieval wagon gonna take place and move around the city and have this street theater in all the monuments around the city. We want this new city theater become part of that path, become part of street theater. And on the right-hand side, there's woodblock print, which I examine different negative and positive spaces in the city. And I was trying to figure out how kind of form the courtyards and alleyways to make a kind of a scenery kind of route around the city. So that's the new theater. That's how you approach it. And in York, there's always this kind of very narrow medieval pathways. It's very difficult to propose a public program in that domestic scale street. What I think of is this, the Basilica of St. Andrea by Alberti in Mantua, where Mantua kind of proposed its threshold-like structure in front of, as the front of the church. It's almost like double the narrow pathway and form kind of an internal arcades in the facade. And that's exactly what I try to do here. So the generosity of this public entrance is not kind of embraced by its scale, but it's about how it respects the historic pathway and the language on site. And for the facade, there's a few ideas how to deal with this public scale, public program scale, but also embrace the domestic scale on site. So the windows and arcades and everything, they're always jumping around kind of large and small and having this contradiction and also this strange similarity as an image of itself. So it looks almost funny, but also very fresh. The main theater space, which is an empty space, according to the theater series Peter Brook, everywhere can be a theater, and even a blank space. So that's the main theater space. When you enter the space, It's a very strange feeling because it's like single height door. But when you enter the space and you look back, the door suddenly become a double height space. And when it's when before the play started, actually you can see the people crossing from the decking to the gallery. And every moment when there's a door opens, there's a moment of theater and a moment of magic happens. Even you are not going to the theater, you may just pass away and you may just take a shortcut going to the courtyard of the theater. In the daytime, you can see the production of the theater, how people prepare all the objects for the play and how they draw the backdrop for the play. You can see the production of the theater as a part of everyday theater. And here's also an example of how I designed this escape door on the gallery side. And it's also a double height door. When the kind of daytime, when you open the door, you can see the technician floor on the top and all this magic kind of happening, which you don't really see in a play, gonna be revealed as the daytime. So that's a closer image. And for the other parts of the program, there's some offices for an artist studio for the theater. We also want this daily working space become part of the theater. Here you can see a reference, which I like very much. It's a piazza in Italy. As you can see, it's not a corridor, but a corridor being inhabited by everyday life. The simple dips of the door frames give the opportunity for the everyday tenants to inhabit this public pathway. And this kind of sequence of the connection of the rooms give you a sense of perspective and also a sense of the theater. The last project I want to present is actually a project I did recently last year. And the most part of it which was designed in the lockdown time during the pandemic. It's a little city within the city. It's a transformation project for architecture school in Aldgate in East London. Here is a sculpture I did at a very early stage of the design, which is a brass model. And everything was kind of unstable. It's an observation of the context of the site. In the middle is the architecture school. And on the right-hand side might be the high-rise building in London. And then there's some market store at the front and some housing block at behind. And everything was kind of kept in a well balance. And I want it not just become an observation of the site, but the project itself can be a little city within the city. So here is the site, the existing architecture school building. And during the daytimes, there always is very nice and diverse markets in front of the street. The idea for the facade is about having a few new elements kind of dancing around and hanging in front of the face of the building, and curating this almost a perspective-like stage for the city. Here is a fabric drawing. I try to layering different colors and materials and elements, even just by putting one in front of another, and adjust and judge how I want to propose this facade. And this is a painted model during early stage. The result is to cut the existing brickwork in strips, so they become like brick pillars standing in front of the street. And then the shining, almost golden-like structure hanging in front, forming a very thin but also powerful stage for the city at different height and levels. As you can see, on the ground floor of the city, the market store on the left-hand side, and you can enter the ground floor of the school. It's a kind of semi-outdoor arcade, and you can exit from the other side, providing a shortcut into the other side of the street. And for the additional work on the top of school, we want to build this new studio space. And this working space, I also want to have some performance quality. I was thinking of this beautiful image by, I can't remember the name, but it's circus tent in Paris. And you can see everyone kind of holding the timber sticks to hold that big tent. And at the same time, I want this working space have this domestic quality, almost like Maison de Verre in Paris as well. So that's the interior of the new studio space. It's not a room, but a big space which all the function and activities can occupy in the space. And you also have that kind of dynamic feeling of the tinsels and the translucent roof on the top, the similar feeling of the circus tent. And that unstable and delicate structure may also remind us maybe everything in our life. And this is a sculpture I did just at the very end of that project, which during the lockdown, I'm using everything I can possibly find in the kitchen and put them together to keep in balance. So the design is not about how good or bad different taste. It's simply about putting everything together and keep it in balance. And if you look close to this image I made, they share the similar quality of that space as well. There's also a lot of thoughts about how to occupy the individual spaces and corners in that big spaces. And there are a few kind of soft divisions borrowing from especially Franco Abinit's exhibition design. They have these thin meshes to kind of separate space. You have that very intimate personal space for working, but you are not going to lose the connection with others in this long gallery space. There's another image on the decking of that space, and you can always feel that connection with the outside world and with others in this big space. Looking down from that big window, and then you're looking into the public arcade on the ground floor. And the tinsel give you a feeling of being an exterior, not inside a building. And you can basically look through the whole program and everything behind the screen. And there's a special treatment for the pavement, and it's about making the internal surface more external-like, almost you are walking on a boulevard or on a public street. The furniture is also very special design for the space. And the idea of this curvy-like tensile roof is about giving the idea of almost like the roof is breathing the air, almost like a breeze in the space. So as you can see here, it's like a breeze of wind or air getting to the space. But it's not just a visual suggestion, because it is actually a semi-outdoor space. You can, it's not fully enclosed. The idea about this arcade is about not being afraid of to challenge what's about the scale and the style. You can maybe feel like you're working in a Cambridge library, but also you are also feeling working in an East London warehouse at the same time. When you exit from the arcade, here you're into this leftover land in between the school and the other residential block. It's also about making a little city, even at the backyard. Here's the cafe facing a tree, a community garden. And that's the other side when you exit from the arcade. Here we propose this kind of outdoor workshop space for the students to make furnitures and woodworks. And that comes from this, one of my favorite painting by Canaletto. It's a Feast Day of Saint Roch. the fabric roof is simply be supported by these very delicate timber structures. And giving a bit context of this painting, I know a lot architect likes painting, is actually a celebration for the end of the pandemic of 16th century in Italy. So it's when I was doing that image, which actually during the lockdown, I was immediately thinking of this image, give us a bit hope. And also here I want to address, here you can see a lot of furniture. They're designed by the kind of prototype of Italian architect Enzo Murray, which passed away yesterday. And yeah, and he's a very respect architect I admire very much. And that's everything. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Yuxin. Such a wonderful presentation. I will suggest everyone just unmute yourself and give a round of applause to Yuxin for this wonderful speech. Okay, I'll do myself. I guess we are open to questions, guys. I think I got Sebastian here as well, who is the program leader of our master studio. So yeah, feel free to raise your question and have a little round of discussion with Yuxin. And I want to raise the point that the last project Yuxin showed is just his 5th year project. So that made me really look forward to your final year projects. I think it's going to be wonderful. It's again, the quality is amazing, and you have used such a wide range of reference from painting, from the different architectural studio, and from the sculpture, and somehow it's synthesized really well and put together as a wonderful project. So very well done. Yeah, any question from the audience? So feel free to also type your question from the dialog bar so I can raise that to the speaker. You see, I want to take the chance to ask you, my studio is currently doing a performance and theater project, and I have spoke to you before. So I want to challenge by asking, because this global pandemic, if that happened before your projects, will you do anything differently? Or anything you will take into consideration and that will massively change your design strategy?
Yes, I think the final project I showed is the first half of the project, which is not, which I still work in school and in studio, and then suddenly the second half project, which is basically done by myself, isolated at home. But I think even in the first parts of that project, I was very interested in this delicate, almost unstable structures, and I was trying to express that the structure of the architecture is kind of the structure of our everyday life, and everything is uncertain and unstable. But those idea which is more like conceptual as during the first semester, and then when it comes to the lockdown, I constantly look back to what I did at beginning, and all those ideas just coming up again, and I think I have even deeper understanding of what that means of like unstable and delicate structure. And it's constantly refreshing. And also the arcades in that project, we are trying to say this a space of breathing. Another time we have this feeling like our everyday life, social space, they're kind of, very constrained, and you can feel like you can breathe. And then that comes to the Black Lives matter
Yeah.
later when I finish that part. And then I have a kind of a deeper meaning of understanding of the idea, the poetic idea of bracing. So everything become in the second half become kind of metaphor for everyday life, and it's constant refreshing when I was doing the design for that project.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. So I think for theater space, do you feel there's a need to, bring this theatrical experience from the original physical box to the urban space, or do you feel that won't change so much after this pandemic? Or do you think we can both have like a play possibly in the theater with some sort of major, like maybe measurement, like social distancing, or still have like on-street performance, like at the same time? So what do you feel could be the possible solution in the future?
Yeah, I think if you think about the project I presented, many of them, they are not actually the actual theater program projects. And even in that theater in Iraq, and it has this potential and possibility to be transformed and occupied by different kind of programs.
Yeah.
And according to the Peter Brook, who writes The Empty Space, so everywhere can be a stage when there's an interaction between people and there's a play, there's a theater. So I think when you design a program, you can't be very strict with a theater or a school. You need to test out different kind of program. And a good room, a good organization for a place, it can be occupied by different kind of programs throughout the time. That's a good place for the city, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Do we have more questions from the audience?
I think there's I saw the Sebastian raise the hand.
Okay. Sebastian, feel free to unmute yourself.
Sorry, did the classic, forgot to mute myself. Yeah, sorry, I was just saying, thank you, Yusin. I enjoyed the presentation. I particularly enjoyed the large models and the paintings. And I wanted to just ask a pragmatic question, because you said you had collaborated on a lot of those projects. Obviously, we're trying to create studio atmosphere, even though we're all kind of spaced out and doing everything on various different platforms and forgetting to unmute ourselves on a regular basis. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how to work with people when you're not in the same physical space or not necessarily even in the same country.
Yes. There are a lot of a pavilion competition I presented as the first part of the talk, which is collaborate with artist friend, Junxi, who is based in Chicago. And when we're doing the competition, part of the time I was in UK working at the same time. And there's some project I was staying in China, working for a different practice. And we exchange, when we're doing the project, we exchange how we feel and what we like, but not particularly related to the project even. And then there's, it's about getting to know each other, how we feel about projects, and finding a way to go to the final production of the design. So I think that is quite useful when I was collaborating with someone not physically interact. So it's not about directly getting into a project, but it's about getting to know each other, how we feel about all the ideas and themes around the project. But maybe that's also quite different with when an architect collaborating with an artist and instead of collaborating with different architects, because the way of thinking is slightly different. Yes.
Yeah, I've had very similar experiences. I've been working or had a lockdown collaboration with a friend in Australia, and she's an artist, and so yeah, we had kind of specific roles within that, I think. But that maybe it is trickier if you're kind of coming from the same field, perhaps.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I see there's a question to everyone on the chat.
It's by Phil.
Yeah.
Phil is my mentor when I was
Yes.
a long time. So I can read out the question. Do you think the metaphor of the theater is something that you can use in almost every architectural project? Yes, I think definitely yes. For me, I think architecture is about creating a space, and it's always about being the backdrop of our everyday life. And all the architects shouldn't be centralized themselves in our daily activities. And it's about making the space for people to interact. And sometimes when there's no people, when there's no interaction, but it can have that presence for the city. But most time, I think a good architecture is the backdrop for the everyday life. Yes.
That's great. You see, I want to extend the question a little bit and ask your personal question. Like, I notice you have engaged in lots of different architectural competition, and certainly you have won lots of architectural competition, with different collaboration. So sometimes we are very hesitant to recommend the student to take competitions because we feel it's within a very short period and you're merely, scratch the surface and you'll never get enough time or enough research to dig into the local context or, to deal with what is actually the problem in that different context. So I want to ask you, what's the reason of participating in different competition? What have you learned, and how did you balance that with your practice work and your student project?
Yeah, that's actually a good one. See, most project I did, which is during the time when I was working freelance in China.
Okay.
Yes, but I think those, especially those pavilion projects, which is they are very short competition, like very short time to produce them actually. As I said, I was constantly collaborating with this artist, and it's also our idea to do a series of work, even those cannot be realized. And they are all very small and little, and they can be placed in everywhere, and they more exist as an idea. So we spend most time to discuss and about the idea and the thing we like, even not really related to the project. And what we submit for the competition almost is just 1 or 2 images. And they are all being produced very quickly. But the idea behind it is embedded in our everyday chat and talk about those ideas and things we like. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Do we have more questions from the audience? Especially for my student from performing architecture studio. If you got any question related to the topic, this is a good time to raise your concern and question. Okay, so if not, thank you, Yuxin, again, and I really look forward to your final project in the uni, and I'm sure it will be great. And next time, I really want to, Michael, do you have any question? No? Okay. When you finish your final year project, I really want to invite you back to, Northumbria at Newcastle and talk about your final project, of course. So for the audience, the next talk I highly recommend will be the Rebuild with Matt and Fiona, which is mentioned by Sebastian yesterday. Sebastian, do you want to give a bit background about Matt and Fiona? Feel free to jump in.
Okay.
This, yeah.
Yeah, just it's going from one platform to another. I'm just making sure I'm unmuted this time. Well, I don't know Fiona, but Matt and I were at college together, so we did part one at the Mac and part two at the Bartlett, and he's been considerably more successful than me. But yeah, really interesting work, using the idea of narrative in the design process. So using narrative models as part of a kind of briefing process, doing some work for, I think it was Birmingham Council, as part of their kind of client side of the Schools for the Future project. And coming out of that, he was always kind of interested in making things as well. So as part of his office, they started kind of doing these away days where they would, just have materials to hand, carrier bags, that sort of thing, and they would go out into a wood and make sculptures out of them, and that became part of the kind of consultation process. So when they were working with schools, getting the kids to kind of participate in the making of the thing that they were doing, and that seems to have become Matt and Fiona as a sort of an offshoot. So kind of educational projects, but educational projects which are based in architecture or architectural ideas, and the way that young people can own or have some kind of sense of ownership over a space, and also getting the kids themselves involved in making it.
Yeah.
So really, really interesting, very kind of colorful and enjoyable work.
Yeah, that's great, and it's very it's not very temporary, or this going to is it a very quick temporary project, or it's permanent?
Both, mixture of both.
Yeah.
So some of them are kinds of installations into a space. Some of them become kind of permanent parts of playgrounds or that sort of thing.
Yeah, cool. So this talk by Matt and Fiona will be held next week. It's also Tuesday, 27th of October, around 12 p.m. But for that one, you really need to register for the events. Yeah, and I just want to mention that. And for the following Master of Architecture talk, I will post that on the website, on the studio website, and I will let you guys know. Yeah, I think that's all for me. Thanks again, Yusin. Thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for joining us. So I will stop here.